Phew. We're not going to be here that long then. The book of Ruth is a story that we all know and is a story that we all love. That book and that story is used a lot in Mother's Day, talking about the power of women and the power of faithfulness. The story of Ruth is about faithfulness, it's about devotion, it's about heartbreak, and it's about reward. As you look at Ruth, Ruth is a very, very small portion of the Old Testament. It's considered a book of history. When you look at the book of Ruth, you see that it has 4 chapters, 85 verses, and depending on your translations, about 2,500 words. It is a very small book when you look at the whole context of what the Bible is. But what we have to understand is as I alluded to last week, we're going to look at the small picture inside of the big picture. And I want to talk to you today on a simple topic. Hold on. Hold on. I want you to repeat that with me. Hold on. Say it one more time. Say, hold on. You know, when you begin to look at big and small, I found a story by Louis Giglio. Some of you know the name, some of you don't. He's a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. He started the Passion Conference movement that gave us Chris Tomlinson and all this other kind of stuff. We sing 2 or 3 songs from the Passion Conference music. And he started the Passion Conference, and later in his dad's life, his dad became disabled. But as he became disabled, he really liked to paint. And I love it when they say they did abstract painting. You know what that means, right? It means you can throw anything on a canvas and call it art, right? That there's no rhyme or reason. You just throw it out there, and there it is. We've got some abstract painting in the kids' building right now as part of the new curriculum. But his dad was a painter. His dad was also famous, and some of you are going to love his dad because back in the 60s, Louis Giglio's dad, which his name was Lou, designed the logo for your favorite fast food restaurant, Chick-fil-A. And so when you look at Chick-fil-A, you can say, I know who created that logo now. But going back into the story, his dad made this painting, and he loved this painting, and he wanted to display it in his house. Well, his wife thought it was putrid. She didn't want to have it nowhere in her house. She thought it was disgusting and ugly and it wasn't going to happen. So they made a compromise. She said, if you can put it in this room, you can hang it. So he got excited. But the problem with the painting was simply this. It was too big to get out the door. So Lou and his son decided what we're going to do is we're going to cut the bottom of the painting off, and we're cutting 8 inches from each side off to get it small enough to get through the door. So they cut it off, he reframed it, and then he put it on the wall that he wanted to. Later in life, Louis' dad passed away, and as he passed away, he began to look through some of his old stuff, and he found this piece of the painting, the bottom part of the painting, that he had put off into storage. And the cool thing about this particular part of the painting was it had his dad's signature on it. And so he decided that he was going to frame this and hang it in his office. Now, he goes on to say that even though it's just a portion of the painting, it was still poster size. It was still huge. And so he put it in his office, and he said every time somebody came in, they would look at that painting and say, what in the world do you have this painting up here for? And then he would begin to go into the story about how his dad did it and how they only saw a portion. But here's the whole point of the illustration. Every time Louis looked at his dad's painting, even though it was just a small piece of it, he saw the whole portion before it was cut. He saw the whole picture, even though there was only a small piece of it in his office. And that's what I want to look at today. In the book of Ruth, if we have a verse that we want to jump from, it's going to be Ruth 1, chapter 14. And as you look at that, the the NIV says this. And at this, they wept loud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. And this version said, Ruth clung to her. Ruth clung to Naomi. Ruth would not let Naomi go. Now, when you begin to look at the story of Ruth, you begin to see that there's a lot of things going on. The book starts off to where there is a famine in God's land in the city of Bethlehem. And there was a man, Elimelech, decided that he had to leave Bethlehem to search for food somewhere else because there was no food in Bethlehem. And so he left and went to Moab, and he brought his family to Moab, his wife and his 2 sons. And as he brought them to Moab, they began to live life and found the food. We have to understand Moab was an enemy of the Israelites. But Moab was an enemy that was not very aggressive. And a lot of times you would find throughout scriptures, especially now because Ruth was written during the time of the judges, you find out that they go to Moab to escape the hardship that was brought onto God's people because of their disobedience. So they go to Moab and they begin to live, but we have to understand that Moab was not a very spiritual place when we think about spirituality, when we think about God, when we think about everything that He has done. But here he is, Elimelech, he led his family to Moab, and as he's there, he passes away. And as he passed away, now Naomi is left there with her 2 sons. And eventually her 2 sons take 2 Moabite wives. We know that Orpah and then Ruth were their wives. And it says 10 years that they lived in the land. And then all of a sudden Naomi's 2 sons pass away. So here is Naomi being led away from the house of God, being led away from Bethlehem into a foreign land. And here she is. Her husband's dead. Her sons are dead. And she is left there with her 2 daughter-in-laws. And as the story goes on, it goes on to say that she's in the field, and as she's in the field in Moab, she hears that the food has returned and God's blessing has returned back to Bethlehem. And so she decides it's time for her to go back to Bethlehem. And as she's going back, she is going to take her daughters with her. And so they begin to walk this road to Bethlehem. They begin to get to where they were going. Naomi stops. And she does something very powerful. Something that we have to learn how to do. Something that is very difficult sometimes for us to do in this world, especially when it comes to following God. We have to give people a choice. You see, we don't give people a choice most of the time. But Naomi stopped and she says, listen, I want you to come. But I have nothing I can give you. I have no more children. I am not married. Even if I was married now and have a baby, would you wait around for him to become of age so you could marry him? I'm not going to make you do that. Go back to your family. Go back to your mother and your father and your people and your gods. Go back. And we find in our scripture that we're jumping from, we find out that Oprah decided that she was going back. But Ruth decided she was going to stay. You see, Ruth was a Moabite woman living her life in her town with her people doing her thing. Now, I want to ask a question. Does this sound familiar to anybody right now? You're living your life. You're doing your thing. You're going by your own rules, your own regulations. You're living and you're doing and you're getting along just fine. Matter of fact, sometimes you get so far out there in Moab, you don't realize how far you are from God because you haven't been close to God in forever. We have to understand that most Moabites did not know about God in the sense of the way the Israelites did. They understood that God moved. They understood that God delivered. They understood that God was with His people, but they never served, nor did they ever get the blessings of the God of Israel. But all of a sudden, she got caught up in a whirlwind that she had no idea was coming her way. When you begin to reread chapter 1, you see again, Ruth is living her life, and all of a sudden, some Israelites move into town. She gets fancy with one of the brothers. She marries the brother. They're going to have a good life. For some reason, within this 10 years, they never had a child, and now her husband dies. And now she has the choice to stay or to go with her mother-in-law. As the story reads, the famine in God's land pushed the family and pushed her away. It was a place that they met people. The Israelites, when they came into Moab, they met different people, 2 of which, like I said, were gorgeous young ladies. Now, we don't know if Ruth was gorgeous. But you know what? When they put it on TV, Ruth is very pretty. Ruth is not somebody you're going to put. If you ever watch the Three Stooges, you know Curly always gets the short end of the stick when it comes to girlfriends. He's always got the girlfriend that's got the veil around her face, and she's got these gorgeous eyes, and he's like, you know, whoop, 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 whoop. He's getting all excited, and all of a sudden that veil comes down, and he begins to bark and trying to run away from this lady. This ain't Ruth. Ruth has got you mesmerized. Ruth has got you there. You want Ruth to be beside you, just like I got my Ruth right there. We just call her Rebecca. But she mesmerized me the first time I saw her, and you know, it's been 21 years ago since I met her, and we've been married. This year would be 17. It's been up and down. It's been up and down. Mostly because of me. But here Ruth is living her life, doing her thing, and now all of a sudden she gets caught up. How little did Ruth know that a connection was being formed by God that would change her life forever. A connection that she did not know what was going on. It was a connection that she did not know then, but it was a connection that she would not let go of now, no matter what it would cost her. It would take her away from everything that she knew and bring her to a place where she would become known. We have to understand how important this is. We have to understand how powerful this story is when it comes to Ruth. You see, sometimes we do not know the story that is being written about us. Sometimes we do. You know, I was going to say that as we get into this, there's a principle that I want you to understand. And the simple principle is this. Your story, as written by you, has two parts. It has a past and it has a present. Your story has no future when you write it yourself. You might sit back and say, well, yes, it does, because I know what I'm doing tomorrow, and I know what I'm going to do now, and I know I got my vacation planned for it, and I got this, and I got that, and I got retirement coming. But you have no idea. You have a past and a present. But when you understand, when you follow his story is always in the future. He's always looking out because he is from the future and he's coming back to the present. He knows where you're going. And so we have to understand the principle is this. When you live your life your way and follow your story, you're like Oprah. You're like the one that was there and had the opportunity but decided to choose herself. And she fell back. And you know what the sad thing is about that young lady? She's not mentioned again in Scripture. You have no idea what happened to her. That proves my point. The principle is simply this. When you live your story, there is no future. But when you live his story, there is a future that will blow your mind when you begin to see what he can do and what he will do for you. You see, you might not know the story that's being written about you, but I know the person that holds the pen, that is sitting behind the desk, that is writing the story. I know the one that dots every I and crosses every T. I know the one that can turn the page and write something completely different. I know the one that has you in the palm of his hand. He knows what your future is, but we have to understand. I know the one that has got it all planned out. It might not fit into our binders. It might not fit into our folders. We might not accept it into our hearts, but there is a plan for your life that he has made, he has created, and all you have to do is hold on. I was going to title this, Hold On to Bethlehem, because that's what Ruth was doing. She was holding on to Naomi as Naomi led her to Bethlehem. She was holding on to go to where Naomi's God was, where God was blessing his people. She was holding on to what God was going to do. She was holding on to Bethlehem. You see, Bethlehem simply means the house of bread. And so when you begin to put that together and you begin to go back to the beginning of the book, all of a sudden now we see a completely different picture. Bethlehem, the house of bread. Bethlehem in famine. How many times have you come to church and all of a sudden you don't get fed? You have nothing going your way. There's just nothing going on, and you feel like your spirit is drying up. And what we do sometimes when that happens is we go to Moab and we try to find other ways to deal with our shortcomings. But we have to understand that Bethlehem was in the famine that they were in because of the disobedience that they were living in. We have to understand that sometimes in our lives, God brings upon a famine because that's what we're asking Him by our choices and the decisions and the way we're living. We get mad and we yell, and sometimes we might even curse God because we're not being fed. But He's saying, I'm giving you what you're planting. I'm giving you what you're asking for. You're walking around in disobedience, and I'm giving you what it is. We have to hold on until we get to Bethlehem. You see, Ruth didn't know what was on the next page, but she knew what she knew then. She knew Naomi was different. She knew Naomi was special. She knew that she had something that she wanted, and she was not going to let go. She was going to cling to. I like the old story, and I can't remember if it was in one of the Samuels or Kings, but it talked about David's mighty men, and as one of the warriors were fighting, the Bible said that his hand clave to his sword. It became one. It was like his hand and the sword melted together to where there was absolutely no separation. And when I think about that picture, I think about that's how Ruth was with Naomi. She grabbed hold of her so tightly that she was not going to let go. Wherever Naomi went, that's where she was going to go. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, Ruth replied to Naomi's request or to her ultimatum or to her ability for everybody to choose. And Ruth said, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. Where you are buried, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. This is from a woman that is leaving everything that she knows. She's leaving her family. She's leaving the blessings of her family. She's leaving her people. She's leaving her culture. She's leaving everything to go to a place to where they're enemies, and she is cleaving hold to this woman, and she wants the God that she has, and she wants the life that she has, because even through all the turmoil and all the tragedy that Naomi had to deal with, there was something about the way she reacted to the situations that caused Ruth to want to go to where she was. How would it be if you had some tragic situation happen in your life and you begin to yell and spit and throw things and punch walls and punch doors? Do you think the people walking with you would want to be around you too long? Absolutely not. They would want to get away from you. They said, well, if he's acting like this because of that, what is he going to do if this happens? But Naomi dealt with it. You see, Ruth had made up her mind, and she was going to hold on until Bethlehem. She was going to hold on until they got there. See, I want to ask you, and I want to tell you to hold on. But where is the blessing? Why is it so hard? Which is the question that we ask ourselves day in and day out as we walk our walk with Jesus Christ. Where's the blessing? Why is life so difficult? Why is life so hard? When you begin to go to Ruth chapter 2, verse 2, you find Ruth saying something to Naomi. She said, Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Two widows living with a broken heart, one living in a foreign land, trying to survive. No man to deal, no man to help, no man to lead, no man to supply needs. Two widows living by themselves. And now we find Ruth, the foreigner, asks her mother-in-law, let me go into the field so I can pick the grain that's left over from the harvest. I don't want this. I just want the leftovers. Whatever the reapers leave behind, that's what I want. You see, we have to hold on. Ruth held on. She went the distance. She made it to Bethlehem, but here they are. You've done everything that you know. You made it to Bethlehem. You didn't let go, but still there's no silver lining. There's no rainbow. There's no break in the hardship. If anything has gotten harder, more difficult, more demanding on you. But what they didn't read And what Ruth didn't know was Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. I don't think you have that, Jaden, but I found it in the Message, and I found it to be very enlightening. When you begin to read it in the NIV, it says, so now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Amalek, whose name was Boaz. There was other translations that says they had a rich relative. But what I like is this, and we're going to get into the part where there's a small picture inside the big picture. When you go back to Ruth 2, verse 1, the Bible reads in the Message, it says, it so happened that Naomi had a relative by marriage, a man prominent and rich, connected to Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. So here we go. They're in Bethlehem. Everything is falling apart. It seems like they made their trip. They got back. Now they're having a bag. Ruth is having to go out to a field. But what Ruth did not know was just so happened Naomi had this relative. And just so happened Naomi had a relative that had a field that was rich and prominent. Just so happened as Ruth began to go out and try to figure out where she's going to go, she ended up upon this field that she began to go behind the reapers and begin to pick up the things that they left behind. They began to pick up the things that they did not want, did not see it was necessary to get everything. They had enough. And as she's in this field and as she's working, we have to understand that it just so happened Naomi had a relative that Ruth was in the field of that relative, and now she was picking grain so they would have something to bring back. You see, our story has a past and a present. God's story has a future. Naomi gave her a choice and the power to choose. Oprah chose herself. Ruth chose God. She chose to go to where Naomi was going. And when you go to Jeremiah chapter 29, now understand, you know where I'm going, but we're going to read a couple more verses. When you start in verse 10, it says, this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are complete for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Oh, that's wonderful. God's plan for you, God's story for you. He is writing, He's already told you He's got a future. But let's read on. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all of the nations and places from where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. The Bible's telling us that God was telling the prophet that there was going to come a time to where people were going to be in exile. They were going to be out. They was going to be kicked out of Bethlehem. The house of bread was going to have no bread, and it was all because of the decisions and the choices that they make. But there was going to come a time, he says, when that time was fulfilled, that I was going to come to you, because I did not make you to put you off into exile. I did not make you to become a prisoner somewhere else, but I made you, and I've got plans for you. I've got purpose. I've got a way that I'm going to bring you forth. And when that time comes, you're going to be able to pray. And when you pray, I am going to hear you, because at that moment, you're going to begin to seek me with all of your heart. And when you seek me with all of your heart, you will find me. We have to understand that God is promising us to bring us back from captivity. And here we are. We have a Moabite into an Israelite field, and she's gleaning, and she's grabbing the things that people did not want. You may not know where or when or how, but those questions have already been answered, already been decided. How are we going to do this? Just hold on. When is it going to happen? Just hold on. I don't know if I can deal with it anymore. Just hold on. But it's getting too difficult. There's nothing in the house. There's a famine. There is no provision. Hold on. Ruth could not see it, but she was walking with a different demeanor, and she was living a different life than what she was in Moab. And she began to walk in this field, and she began to pick, and she began to work for her mother-in-law, and she began to work and began to glean. And all of a sudden in chapter 2, verse 5, Boaz goes up and he says, Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does this young woman belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning until now, except for a short rest under the shelter. You see, there was something inside of Ruth. And what I'm hoping is today that what was inside of Ruth gets inside of you today. And you begin to understand that even though things didn't work out the way they were supposed to work out, and you didn't get the things that you wanted to get, and things just didn't happen the best way possible, but you decided to hold on until you got to Bethlehem. And when you held on until you got to Bethlehem, now you find yourself in a field that is full of prosperity, is full of grain, is full of provision, and now you are behind the reapers and you're grabbing things, and it's more than you can hold. There's more than you can grab, and the man that owns the field begins to notice who you are. We have to understand that even though there's a famine, even though you don't have everything, there is something about the way you hold yourself. There's something about the way you move. There's something about your dedication. There's something about your excellence in everything that you do. And when you walk in excellence and you live in excellence and you do everything unto God, you begin to see that people begin to notice you. But it doesn't matter the people that begins to notice you, but the person that needs to notice you begins to notice who you are, because there is something different about you. And because there's something different about you, he begins to ask questions about, who is this in my field? Who is this? Well, this is the one that came from the far land, that had no spiritual life, that didn't know our God. This is the one that was way over there, and she came because her husband died, and she decided to stay with her mother-in-law. And here she is getting grains and food for her mother-in-law. You see, so many times we walk into this church and we get so upset because things don't happen the way we want them to happen. The word is not spoken the way the word is supposed to be spoken for you to receive. You didn't hear the message that you needed to hear. You didn't hear the song that you asked God, if it's really you, let this song be played today. If it's really you, let them play it in this key, in this arrangement. And I know, God, that is you. That is my fleece. I know that you are speaking to me. But sometimes God don't work that way, because we cannot manipulate God. God says, what I need you to do is to come into the house, come into the field, and go behind that has already been picked, and pick up what they left off. Pick up all the leftovers. You have to understand, even the leftovers in the hand of God is more than the richest person in the whole world. We have to understand that even though it's a leftover, it's from the hand of God, and it is providing for us. But we have to understand that the leftovers is what's going to sustain us until we get to the place where God is calling us. You see, she went for the leftovers. She was last. She came after everyone. She stayed behind the workers, stayed behind the good stuff to get what was left over. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like you've come into church, you went to work, you lived your life, you went and ate dinner with your family, and all of a sudden you just begin to feel like you're the last person on earth that ever needed to be here. Nobody's ever recognizing you. Nobody's patting you on your back. Nobody's allowing you to sit down first. Nobody's allowing you to do this. And you always feel like you're last. You're always second nature. You're always the one behind there. You're the caboose and never the engine. But we have to understand that God's got something to say about that. Ruth worked with a diligence. She worked with excellence. That mind, that heart, that perseverance got her notice. That dedication got her rewarded. Sometimes we feel like we will never get there. We will never have the best. We will never have the better seat. We will never have the better view. We will never have the better fruit. The road will never get smooth. The mountains will never get small. But even though all this goes on, Jesus looked out to his disciples and to the people as he was teaching in Matthew chapter 20. And I love what he says. He said, you know, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Well, God, why did they get everything that I got when they only came the last hour of the day? Because they came and they did what I asked them to do. And because I asked them to do it, I said, if you would do it, this is going to be the reward and the payment that you get. You can't be upset because they're doing the same thing you did. You just came along a little bit sooner. The last shall be first. And here it is. Ruth is walking around. She's gleaning. She's picking up. She's getting all the things that are left over. And Boaz began to come over and begin to talk to her. And as Boaz began to talk to her, he began to find out more about her story. I know about you. I heard about you. I know what you've done. I know where you came from. You see, God was working things out. And I want you to hear this for yourself. Forget Ruth for a second. When I say Ruth, you say your name. Just don't say it out loud. Ruth could not see what God was working out on her behalf at that moment. Ruth could not see when she was in Moab and everything was going on. She could not see the hand of God moving. But God, like the song says, he's always moving. When you cannot see him, when you cannot feel him, when you cannot hear him, he's always moving. All parts of his story have an ending. Have you ever felt unloved? You ever felt forgotten? Have you ever felt left out? Betrayed? Left for dead? God has shown us, even though that has happened to you, it just so happens. It just so happens I know a man that has a field that is prominent and rich. It just so happens I know somebody that can change your life. You might be feeling left out. You might feel like you have no purpose. You might feel like you have no plan for life. But it just so happens when you begin to feel that way, I know a man that can change everything with a word from his mouth. I know a man with a movement of his hand. He can change everything that you see. And now we find out that Boaz goes up and begins to talk. In verse 10 it says, and this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have you found such favor? Or why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me? I'm a foreigner. I'm not an Israelite. I'm not under covenant. I'm not a churchgoer. I'm not a member. What have I done that you have found favor with me? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of her husband, or since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge. There is something about when you leave a life that is away from God and you move to where He's calling you, even though you have no idea where it is. You have no idea where you're going. You don't know where you're going to end up. But as Boaz says, you have taken refuge under the wings of the Almighty. When you get under the wings of the Almighty and He begins to spread His wings out, there is not a devil in hell. There's not a weapon that can come against you, because His wings are going to protect you. His wings are farther than you can see. They're in front of you. They're behind you. Everywhere around you, when you go and you seek refuge under the power of God, He is going to protect you. This Redeemer knew all about her, and He looked out for her. When you go back up to verse 9 of chapter 2, it says, watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And wherever you are thirsty, you go and get drink from the water jugs that the men have filled. You may feel like the sun is beating down on you and there is nowhere to go, but the Redeemer is making a way. He is providing protection, He's providing provision, and He is blessing you even though you do not see it. But even though you do not see it, even though you cannot hear Him, even though you do not feel it, He sees you and He's moving on your behalf. He doesn't have to walk up and tell you, but He begins to tell the people that's in your life. You may not understand it. He might not come to them in a dream. He might not come to them in a prayer. But when God begins to speak, I don't care what happens. Nobody can stop Him. I don't care what they try to do. His word's going to go forth. They may be believers. They may be heathens. They may be devil worshipers. But when my God stands up and He moves toward your situation and He begins to talk on your behalf, I don't care what happens. They have to listen. Listen to what He says in verse 15. As she got up to go glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Boaz gave orders to his men. God is the God of all people. It doesn't matter if you believe or if you don't believe. He controls you, and there's going to come a day to where every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess. But he says he walked up and he ordered his men, let her gather among the sheaves and do not reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and do not rebuke her. Well, Pastor, what is that saying? Well, now she don't have to work as hard because now she's not picking up every little seed, every little barley thing out on the ground that the harvesters have left behind. But what Boaz said is, what I need you to do, guys, I need you see that sheath that you got put together? I need you to get you a good handful and pull it out and lay it on the ground so she can get the best of the best. She's no longer going to be the last, but now she's going to become the first. I want her to get everything that you're getting. I want her to get everything that you're getting from me, because what you're getting from me, I am providing for her. And not only am I providing for her, I'm going to protect her, because if you touch her, I'm telling you right now, I've already told you, do not lay a hand on her, do not reprimand her, do not rebuke her. We have the power and we have the protection of a God that is sitting over us and looking on every moment of our life. He's got a story written for us, and we do not understand that. I'm trying to get to the end, but I won't shut up. Verse 11 says, and the elders, as she held on, she began to do this. And we're going to skip chapter 3 as Naomi gave her instructions of what to do. And she did what Naomi told her to do. And now we jump into chapter 4. And we find that the kinsman redeemer in verse 11 found so much favor within Ruth, cared for her so much, that he decided to redeem her to himself. But he had to go through steps. But in verse 11 of chapter 4, it says, and then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming to your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel, that you may have standing in Ephrathah. And I love this last part. When I read this, I jumped out of my bed. And be famous in Bethlehem. Oh, y'all don't get it. Y'all don't understand. Let this woman that you're bringing into your house be famous in Bethlehem. You see, when you begin to read this and you begin to put everything together, the big picture and then the small picture, the big story and the small story, the writer, as they wrote the book of Ruth, the writer had no idea, the author, not the author of our faith, not God himself, but as the man that God used to pen down Ruth and write Ruth down, as he began to write it, as he got the unction from the Holy Spirit, and he began to write this down, he's like, oh, God, this is good stuff. Oh, man, this is going to bless some people down the road. And he's right, and he gets to chapter 4, verse 11, and he ends it with, she will be famous in Bethlehem. The writer had no idea how famous in Bethlehem she would become. The kinsman redeemer reached Ruth. The first kinsman redeemer came, and because of that, there was a shepherd boy named David that became the king. And after that, they became they became a second kinsman redeemer. And there was one that was a redeemer of all redeemers, the eternal redeemer. That future held time when we begin to understand what's going on here. Boaz and Ruth are not the people you would thought that would bring about the Messiah, but they are in the lineage of the Messiah. And here we go. We don't understand the story that God has got going on. We don't understand what's going on, but we do know this, is that his future held a time. And within that time, it brought forth a baby. That baby held the eternal future of all mankind in its hands. And that baby came from, where did it come from? It came from Bethlehem, because there was a woman that was written for years and years and years ago that says you will become famous in Bethlehem. And God was holding true to his word. You see, we don't understand what's going on. Ruth had no idea what was going on. She was minding her own business. Some out-of-towners came into her life. She married one of them. She lost one of them. She mourned. She moved. And she made a new life somewhere that was a foreign land. His story is better. His story is bigger. His story is unstoppable. Ruth could not see his story as she lived her story. God went to great lengths to get Ruth to where she needed to be to take part into his story. And I need you to understand that, and I need you to hear that. Here we have, I'm trying to get done. Here we have a Moabite living way over here in the land of nobody really cares. And now we have the land of Bethlehem. They're in famine. And somehow God's got to get Ruth, because he's going to use Ruth, because he wants to use Ruth. He's got to get her to Bethlehem so she can meet Boaz that will bring forth Obed, that's going to bring forth Jesse, that's going to bring forth David. Through all this, it's going to bring forth Jesus Christ. So how am I going to do this? I'm sending a famine into Bethlehem, and there's going to be a family that's going to go to Moab. So as they go to Moab, Ruth bats her eyes. She's got her pretty dress on. She gets picked up, and now she's married, and now all of a sudden something bad happens. But God is moving, and God is writing, and God has a future, and God's got a story. And because of all of that, there's something about Naomi that Ruth grabbed hold to, and it took her into the place called Bethlehem. And because of that, God's got all of his pieces, all of his parts where he needs to be. You see, sometimes we forget who we are because we think we're so good. We forget who we are because we think we're this person. We think we're this special. But we have to understand who God uses. Who is Boaz? He is the offspring of a prostitute named Rahab that did the work of God. Whenever God asked her to do what she needed to do, she did exactly what God told her to do. And because of that, he gave her Boaz down her lineage. And because of that, now we have Ruth, a Moabite that did not know who God was, and God brought her into the lineage of Jesus Christ. And now we have the eternal kinsman redeemer that no matter where you go, no matter what you do, is always redeeming you. All we have to do is lift our hands up and allow him to touch us. You see, if they understood, if the writer understood what he was writing, if he could see God's full story, I imagine that he would write verse 11, famous in Bethlehem, in huge words, just to let people understand what was going on. But what we have to understand is, unfortunately, in today's age, today's time, today's difficulty, you know, I forget who it was. Somebody put something on Facebook that, you know, sometimes you just want to punch the screen. You ever want to do that? I don't, because computers are expensive, and I'm just not going to do that. But I showed Becca, and I told the boys, and it was, again, I don't remember who put it on there, and you probably have already seen it and probably ought to have been discussed it yourself. But it was, I believe it was in Barnes & Noble, and they had a setting of books, of kids' books out, and it was called The Gay BCs. Not the ABCs, the Gay BCs. And as they were talking about it, you ought to open it up, and this individual took 3 pictures of A, B, and C. No, B, C, and D. And it had little 3-4 line rhymes. B, being bi. C, coming out. D, living in drag. And I sit back and I say, you know what? This is where we are right now. This is where we are right now. And because of things like this, there's a famine that's going to come to the land. There's a famine that will come to the land because people are getting far away from where God wants them to go. And I'm getting all the way back to where I'm trying to talk about right now. It doesn't matter what the world says is okay. Truth is truth. Right is right. And the book was sealed by blood. And no matter what happens, this would always trump anything and everything else in the world. And it doesn't matter what's going to be the best seller. There's never going to be a better seller than the book that I hold in my hand right now. But we have to understand, we get so disgusted instead of becoming like Ruth and holding on in all of the bad times and holding on and leaving what we know to go to what we don't know and to begin to live a difficult life until we get to the place where the kinsman redeemer is beginning to move on our behalf, even though he's already been moving on our behalf before we even know what's going on. We have to understand that he's moving on our behalf, and we have to get the spirit of Ruth inside of us. It says, no matter what happens, I'm going to hold on until Bethlehem. The Orpah spirit needs to go away. We don't need to worry about what we get to ourselves. We don't need to worry about, well, it's going to be difficult. I'm not going to like it. It's not going to work out the way I want to. I got this, I got that. What we have to understand is there is no more mention of this young lady in Scripture. All we know, she went back to Moab, lived a life under the Moab religion, and is now suffering the consequences of her decisions that she's made. My question to you, Amy, if you'll come play softly. My question to you is this. Are you willing? Are you willing to get the spirit of Ruth? Are you willing to be like Ruth and grab hold to God and not let go, no matter what happens, no matter what goes on, no matter what is the world is saying? I could imagine when Ruth first got into that field and she was gleaning and she was picking up what she was picking up. I could imagine she got some stares. What are you doing here? You sound funny, you look funny. I know you're not one of us. Oh, I know who you are. Now you're coming out here picking up the stuff that we're leaving behind. But then all of a sudden, the boss walks in. You see, we have to understand that sometimes when we don't get the best, we refuse to pick up the leftovers. And because we refuse to pick up the leftovers, we leave here empty and not fulfilled in what God wants to do for our lives. But if we would have the audacity and the tenacity and the excellence to reach down and pick up that leftover, you don't want this blessing? Take it myself. You don't want this provision? It's good enough for me. I got somebody at home that needs this. You don't want this? I'm going to pick it up. And everything you leave behind that you said is not good enough, not bad enough, not bright enough, not pretty enough, not shining enough, not expensive enough. Whatever you don't want, you just leave. Because I know that this field, now she understands that this field is a field that's going to change her life because it belongs to the kinsman redeemer. I understand the Bible says that we serve somebody that owns the cattle of 1,000 hills. There is no way we're ever going to go for want. There's no way we're ever going to beg, because no matter what happens, he's always got something for us. And we live that life of excellence when nothing is too good and everything is just it's like Goldilocks. This right here is just right. Every blessing from God, no matter how big, how small, how good, how bad, is just right. Ruth